The table was set for 3. I had pressed the linen napkins myself that morning, the same ones Frank and I used for every anniversary dinner since we were young and broke, and eating on a card table in a studio apartment in Dayton, Ohio. 50 years of marriage. I pressed every crease with my hands, the way I always had, because Frank liked things done properly, and I had never stopped doing them that way even after he was gone. I made his favorite, pot roast with carrots and the little pearl onions he used to fish out of the pot with his fingers, before dinner was even on the table. A bottle of Malbec, the kind we opened on special occasions. 2 candles. His photograph beside the centerpiece. The one from our 42nd anniversary, where he had just laughed at something and turned toward the camera without knowing it. And the look on his face was the most honest thing I had ever seen. I had called my son 3 weeks earlier. He said he would come. He said, "Of course, Mom. I wouldn't miss it." My daughter called me back the same day, breezy and warm, and said she and her husband would drive up Saturday afternoon, and we would all sit together and remember Dad. I believed them both because they were my children, and I had spent 51 years believing the best of the people I loved. By 6 o'clock, the pot roast was resting. By 7, it was cold. By 7:30, my son's text came through. "Sorry, Mom, something came up. You know how weekends get. Give Dad a toast from me." No punctuation, no explanation. He called his father Dad, the way you'd say the guy when you can't quite be bothered to use a name. My daughter didn't text. She left a voicemail at 8:15, chipper and sunburned, the sound of waves and music behind her voice. "Mom, oh, I completely lost track of what weekend this was. We're down at Hilton Head with the Kellers. You know how long we've been trying to get this trip together. I'll call you next week and we'll do something, okay? Tell Dad I love him. Tell Dad I love him." Frank had been in the ground for 8 months. I sat at the table for a long time after that. The candles burned down. I ate alone, slowly, and the pot roast was good even cold, because I had been making it for half a century and I knew exactly what it needed. I poured myself a glass of wine, then another, and I looked at his photograph and tried to imagine what he would say. Knowing Frank, he would have shrugged and said, "Well, more for us." He was good at that, turning disappointment into a private joke between the two of us. It was the wine, maybe, or the way the quiet of that house pushed in from every corner that made me open Facebook. I am not someone who scrolls. Frank used to tease me about it. But something moved my thumb across the screen. My daughter's profile was public. She had posted 3 hours ago. A photo of herself and her husband, and another couple on a deck somewhere, drinks in hand, the ocean glittering behind them. She was wearing the white sundress she had bought with the birthday money I sent in March. The caption said, "First real vacation in forever. Living for this." 47 people had liked it. 3 had left little heart emojis. My son had posted too. A poker table ringed with friends, poker chips piled high, everybody grinning. "Saturday night done right," he had written. "These guys are the best." I looked at the screen until the brightness made my eyes ache. Then I set the phone face down on the tablecloth, beside the napkin he never unfolded, and I sat with that feeling for a while, the one that doesn't have a name, that lives somewhere between grief and recognition. That feels less like a wound and more like a door finally coming open on a room you always suspected was there. They chose this. They did not forget they chose. There is a file cabinet in the hallway that Frank built into the wall of our house in 1989. He was proud of it. He made it from reclaimed oak, fitted with small brass handles, each drawer labeled in his careful block print: household, taxes, medical, records. And one more, at the bottom, labeled simply family. I hadn't opened it since the week after the funeral. I opened it that night. Inside were folders, sorted and cross-referenced the way Frank did everything. Thoroughly, without drama. My son's folder was thick. I sat on the floor of the hallway with my back against the wall and I read every page. A check for $42,000 in 2009, when my son's landscaping business needed bridge financing and the bank had turned him down. Frank had argued against it. I had written the check anyway. The business folded the following spring, and my son never mentioned repayment again, not once in 15 years. A second loan in 2014, $28,000, when he and his wife bought a house that was slightly beyond what they could afford, but that my daughter-in-law had fallen in love with and would not negotiate away from. We were told it was a loan. There was never a repayment schedule. There was never a payment of any kind. Christmas cards, yes. Mother's Day calls, yes. The $28,000 had become a gift by mutual unspoken agreement. His unspoken, mine absorbed. My daughter's folder was thinner, but the entries were steadier, more reliable. A drip rather than a flood. Her car, 2007, $12,000. Her divorce attorney fees in 2016, which I paid without being asked because she called me crying at midnight, and I could not stand the sound of it, $15,000. The roof on her new house the following year, $9,000. Medical bills when my grandson was born early. And the insurance gap was larger than she had anticipated, $11,000. Totaling the columns in my head, my hands were perfectly steady. At the very back of my daughter's folder, folded twice and tucked behind a copy of a bank statement, was a piece of paper I didn't recognize at first. I unfolded it. It was in Frank's handwriting, dated about 14 months before he died. "I know you'll keep giving," it said. "That's who you are, and I have always loved that about you. But I want you to know that I see what it costs you, even when you pretend it doesn't. The children will not change. I hope I am wrong. I don't think I am. When the time comes, give what you have left to someone who has already shown you who they are. You'll know who. You always do." I read it twice on the floor of that hallway. Then I folded it along its original creases and held it against my chest and did not cry because that feeling, the one without a name, had shifted into something else. Not peace, not yet, but the earliest edge of clarity. I called my attorney first thing Monday morning. I had used the same firm for 30 years. The man who handled our estate planning knew Frank and knew me, and when I told him I needed to revise my will completely, he did not try to talk me out of it. He asked me to come in. I told him I wanted to remove my son and my daughter from every provision. The house, the investment accounts, the savings accumulated over a lifetime of careful, unglamorous choices. Frank's life insurance, his pension, the money we had never touched because we always thought there would be time to enjoy it later, and then later arrived and Frank was gone. I wanted all of it redirected. He asked where I wanted it to go. I told him about Nola. Nola had been 7 years old when her mother, my closest friend for 30 years, was diagnosed with cancer. She was 11 when her mother died. After the funeral, I drove Nola to school every morning for 2 years because her father was doing the best he could. But mornings were hard for him, and the bus route was unreliable. I taught her to bake. I helped her with college applications. When she got her first job out of school, she called me before she called anyone else. When Frank got his diagnosis, she drove 4 hours each way, every other weekend, to sit with him. She brought him audiobooks because his eyes were going. She memorized the specific way he liked his coffee. She sat beside his chair and listened to him talk about the years we spent building this life. And she asked questions. And she asked him questions as though his stories were the most important thing she had ever heard. She called me every Sunday, not to ask for anything, just to call. My attorney drew up the papers. I signed them the same afternoon, with the same steadiness I had used to read those financial records on the hallway floor, because a decision made in clarity does not waver. My daughter arrived 2 days later. She did not call ahead. I heard the car in the driveway and watched from the window as she walked toward the door, her shoulders set in the particular way they get when she has decided she is right about something and is preparing to explain it. She did not mention the anniversary dinner. She came in and stood in my kitchen and asked if it was true that I was changing my will. I finished folding the dish towel in my hand and set it on the counter. "Yes," I said. She asked who told her. Nola had not known anything yet. It must have been my attorney's assistant calling to confirm a follow-up appointment. My son happened to be in my daughter's house when the message came through on my phone, which she had borrowed to make a call. She didn't say any of this directly, but I pieced it together quickly enough. She said it was extreme. She said she understood I was grieving and that grief made people do things they later regretted. She said she and her brother had made mistakes, but that didn't mean they deserved to be written out of their father's estate. Their father's estate. I looked at her across the kitchen and I felt almost nothing. Not anger, not the old urge to smooth things over, not the reflex to apologize for upsetting her. Just a flat, clean calm. I said, Your father's anniversary was last Saturday. I made his favorite dinner. I pressed the napkins he liked. I set 3 places at the table, and you were on a beach with the Kellers. She said she had forgotten. I said, I know. She said it wasn't fair to punish them for one mistake. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and I took out a small notebook. Nothing significant, just a pad I had been writing in that week. I had written down the amounts from the folders. I read them to her out loud, slowly, with the year beside each one. Her car, her attorney, her roof, her son's birth costs. I did not raise my voice. I did not editorializing. I just read the numbers. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That's what family does. They help each other." I said, "You're right," and I helped. For 30 years I helped, quietly and without conditions. All I ever asked was that you show up when it mattered. Last Saturday mattered. Your father's funeral 8 months ago mattered. You were not there for either one. She picked up her bag from the counter. She said I was making her feel terrible for being human. I said, "I hope you feel whatever it is you need to feel, but I've made my decision." She left the same way she came in, without asking how I was doing, without one question about whether I was eating or sleeping or managing the house alone. The door closed behind her and I stood in my kitchen and thought, there it is. Even now, she could not do it. My son came 3 days after that. He brought his wife with him, and she wore the expression of a woman who has agreed to attend something unpleasant as a gesture of marital solidarity. They sat in my living room with their coats on. My son said he had disappointed me. He said he knew that, and he was sorry. He said he loved me, and that whatever happened with the will, he wanted me to know that. I believed the sorry. I believed the love, in the way that love is sometimes true and still not enough. His wife said that Nola was very young and might not handle a significant inheritance responsibly. She said it gently, leaning forward, her hands folded over her knee. I said, "She's 34. And she sat with your father-in-law every other weekend for the last year of his life. And she was at his funeral, which is more than I can say for the people currently sitting in my living room." My son looked at the floor. I said, "I forgive you. I want you to know that. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and it's not the same as pretending nothing happened. You are my son, and I will love you until I can't anymore. But I built this life with your father, and I will decide where it goes." They left without argument. My son hugged me at the door, a long hug, tighter than usual, and I patted his back the way I had when he was small, and I could fix things for him with just that. I could not fix this. Neither could he. Nola called that Sunday, same as always, and I asked if she could come by that week. She said, "Of course." She said, "Of course," the way some people say it. Without the hesitation, that means they're calculating what it will cost them. She arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. She had driven an hour and a half, and she brought flowers from a farm stand, loose-stemmed zinnias in orange and yellow. And she put them in the blue pitcher without being told where it was, because she had been in this kitchen enough to know. We sat at the table, and I poured coffee, and we talked for a while about nothing important. Her work, the drive down, a book she was reading that she thought I might like. She had always been easy to be with. Frank used to say she had the gift of presence, meaning she was actually there when she was there, not halfway somewhere else. I got up and went to the desk in the hallway and came back with a manila envelope. I set it in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at me. I told her to open it. She read slowly. I watched her face move through the first page, then the second. She stopped somewhere near the middle and looked up. She said, "What is this?" I said, "It's yours, the house, the accounts, the savings, all of it." She shook her head. She pushed the envelope back toward me gently, as if it were fragile. She said she couldn't take this. She said, "What about my son and my daughter?" I said, "They'll be fine. They always land on their feet. That's something I helped teach them, though not in the way I intended." Her eyes filled, and she didn't look away from me, which I appreciated. Some people look away when they cry, as though the emotion embarrasses them. Nola looked right at me with her eyes wet and her hands flat on the table. She said, "I didn't know it was your anniversary that weekend. I would have come. I would have just come." I said, "I know, sweetheart. That's why we're sitting here." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she took a breath. She said she didn't know how to hold something this large. I said, "You already are. You've been holding me together for 2 years without anyone asking you to, and without anyone noticing. Now I'm asking you to hold something else." We sat for a long time after that. The zinnias were very bright in the blue pitcher on the counter. Outside, the maple tree Frank planted in 1991 was starting to turn, the first edges of orange just beginning to show in the upper branches. He planted it because he wanted something in the yard that would get better with age. That was Frank. Always thinking about the long version of things, always planting for a future he might not be there to see. That evening after Nola left, I walked out to the garden. The roses needed cutting back. I had been putting it off, the way you put off things that remind you of someone. Frank tended these bushes with an almost irrational dedication, talking to them on warm evenings like they were old friends who just needed a little encouragement to keep going. I took the pruning shears from the shed and I cut back what was finished, the brown and the dry, the canes that had run too long without direction. It took an hour. When I was done, the roses looked stark and raw but properly tended, the kind of cut that looks like a loss before it becomes a beginning. I went inside and washed my hands at the kitchen sink and stood there for a minute, looking out the window at the yard. The maple was holding its color. The garden was cut back. The house was quiet, in the way it gets in the late afternoon, the light going low and warm, every surface familiar. I was not happy, exactly. Happiness felt like the wrong word for what I had. What I had was something steadier, something that didn't depend on anyone else agreeing with my choices or understanding them or forgiving me for them. My son and my daughter would tell their version of this story, the way people always do when they've lost something they expected to have forever. They would say, "I was cold." They would say I was grieving and didn't think clearly. They would find a way to make my choices into something that happened to them, rather than something I chose for myself. Let them. I had stopped needing them to understand me sometime between Monday and Wednesday of that week, somewhere between the files on the floor and Frank's letter in my hand. You cannot spend your whole life managing other people's interpretations of you. At some point, the effort costs more than it returns. I made tea. I took it to the front porch and sat in the old rocker Frank refinished 12 years ago and never fully got the finish right on, so one arm was slightly tacky, and we laughed about it every summer. The street was quiet. A few neighbors walking dogs in the early dark, the kind of neighborhood that has been itself for 40 years and hasn't changed much and probably won't. I thought about what Frank wrote in that letter. You'll know who. You always do. He was right. I had known for years. I had just been so busy being useful that I hadn't stopped to look at what I actually wanted the end of the story to say. It's a strange thing to arrive at this age and feel like you're beginning something. Not something big or loud, nothing like that. Just the quiet beginning of a life where what you have left goes to someone who sees you. Where Sunday mornings mean a phone call from someone who calls because she wants to, not because she needs something. Where you can sit on a sticky-armed porch rocker with a cup of tea and feel, with some certainty, that you made the right choices in the end. Even if the end took longer to arrive than you planned. Even if some of the people you loved most along the way couldn't meet you here. The tea went cool. I stayed on the porch until the street went dark and the neighbors' lights came on, one by one, each house yellow warm against the October night. Then I went inside, washed my cup, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. I slept well. I had been sleeping better lately, the way you do when the heaviest thing you were carrying has finally been set down in the right place. Tomorrow, Nola was bringing that book she mentioned. We were going to read the first chapter together on the porch and argue about whether the narrator was trustworthy, the way Frank and I used to argue about books on long car trips. Both of us too stubborn to concede. Both of us enjoying it too much to stop. I was looking forward to it.